Hello, everyone. So, welcome to episode 5 of the Let's Chat About Money podcast series. So, today I'm joined with Devon from Classhouse Property. So, I actually went to school with Devon just before recording this podcast, while saying we haven't actually seen each other since leaving school. I think it's 16 years ago now, which is quite scary. And Classhouse Property is a private housing provider in South Tyneside, and their focus is on high quality rentals. Um, so I'm a northeast based sort of finance content creator. So I thought it'd be really useful to have someone on from the northeast who's got their own business and can tell us a bit more. So, Devon, I don't know, do you want to just tell us a bit about your business in your own words?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having us on your show. I really appreciate it. And it's been 16 years since we're at school, so show my age there, aren't we? But yeah, sure. A little bit about a business. So I run a business called Classhouse Property, which is based in South Tyneside. We're a private housing provider, as you said, and we offer long-term rental accommodation to local working families and professionals. All of our properties are fully refurbished before being made available for rent. And anyone who does rent with us is welcome to do so for as long as they like. Want and need to. Providing kind of housing stability to our local community is important. One of the things that we value. We're also a developer. So we buy land and build new houses as well, which we also offer for rent in our local area. Very privileged that I work with a fantastic team of local trade suppliers, professionals, advisors, family and friends as well, who support me in the business. And what I do would not be possible without that team. So I get a huge amount of help from some very talented people, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
So
Like,
that's me and the business.
yeah. Interesting. I mean, I keep up with it on Facebook, the posts you put, and I think something
Yeah.
that strikes out to me, which I really like the values of, is providing that high quality rental accommodation because I think the rental sector is really important. Not everybody's going to be in a position to own their own home, and it's not always the right circumstance for people to own their own home. So I think it's really good that there's people who cater to people in the rental market and pride themselves on providing good quality housing. Um,
Yeah, well, that's nice. It's nice to hear it. It's nice that it is appreciated. No, it is, for our customers, we want to provide high quality housing. So you get good customers, people who want good housing tend to look after them as well. And obviously, if you provide good housing from the outset, people do tend to look after them. And from a maintenance perspective, if you provide a good quality product from the start, it's easier to maintain, and your customers have a better experience. And obviously, rents are expensive these days. You want to be providing a quality service as well.
yeah. And just going back a bit, so how did you first get started in property to begin with? So was it a family thing or was this something that you just started yourself?
Yeah, so I did kind of grow up around construction. So my dad, my granddad, my uncle, and my next door neighbour were all business partners, and they ran a building company in the northeast doing residential build work. So your standard extension. They did build new houses as well. Um, but was mainly residential building work. So I was exposed to build work and property development as being something that was quite normal from quite a young age. And then when I was about 14 or 15, I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's kind of like the Bible of property. A lot of people who aren't property would have read this book at some point. So yeah, I read that when I was a teenager, and then that was it. I was going to go into property. So I kind of started saving purposefully to buy property then. I mean, I already had some savings as a teenager, but I kind of doubled down on my efforts, and I started asking my family if I could have money for Christmas and birthdays instead of presents. And then like I got a job straight after after we left secondary school. And all my wages from like my Saturday job at River Island, and I used to stack shelves at my local Asda store. And even then, I was like, right, all this money, it's going into a house deposit, so I can get started in property, whilst I was kind of educating myself about property investment and what it involved. At that time as well, I think it was maybe at the point I went to sixth form, so maybe it's when I was about 17. I started to learn how to source property and find it as investments, because my family did start investing as well. So obviously I was still quite young at the time. So I learned about it through sourcing property for them rather than buying my own property straight away. So I started developing that as a skill. And even in the business today, it's mainly me who kind of sources all the investments. And from there, I just kept saving. And I had managed to get a deposit together before kind of I left school and went off to university. Um, and then it wasn't until I moved to London straight after uni and started a graduate scheme, and then I bought my own house there with someone I went to uni with. And during the time that we had that property, we'd rent out the spare rooms to our friends, which helped cover our living costs and also provide our friends with somewhere nice to live as well. And then I started saving for the next property from there, and just kind of spiraled after that, and then eventually progressed onto land development. So I feel like I'm at a bit of an advantage in the sense that I do come from a family who were active in the construction side of things. And I also kind of knew what I wanted to do from quite a young age. So I was able to start preparing for that from
Yeah.
a young age. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into things.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And I think I love the bit about you saying that when you were living in London, you bought property there, and then, you bought it with a housemate, and then the other people that you
Yeah.
lived with, they were able to rent. And because I went to uni in Edinburgh, and we all, like, I used to joke with my parents, like, "Oh, if only we bought a flat in Edinburgh when I was renting," because all the money that I was spending on rent in
Yeah.
Edinburgh, um I could have actually paid off a bit of a mortgage if I'd actually had the property myself. Yeah, that's really interesting. And so, am I right in thinking that you're in property full time now, or do you still do some sort of work alongside it?
Yes and no. So as well as being in property, I'm a finance professional as well. So I'm a chartered management accountant, and I work on kind of large scale finance transformation projects. When I left uni, I joined a consultant graduate scheme with Deloitte in the city in London. So I worked with them for about 4 years. And then I took a career break. And after my career break, I still wanted to do that sort of work as well, because it does interest us. And you earn a lot of money from that type of work. So when you're dealing in property, which is very capital intensive, it does
Mm,
help when you first starting out to have obviously another income stream, because it reduces your reliance on external funding, which we can get into in a little bit. So I still do dip in and out of the consultancy work, but I'm not doing it so much now because I've got a lot going on the property side of things. But I do kind of freelance work in the finance space as and when I've
right.
got the time and capacity and want to do it. So yeah, so I dip in and out of consultancy work and property. I find that that's good as well in terms of keeping a good balance, because property is quite slow. Like, it takes a long time to get things over the line in terms of buying things and planning permission and actually executing on a project. Like, it takes a very long time, whereas the consultancy work that I do is quite fast paced. And I spent a lot of time learning how to do the types of projects that I do. So it's not something I just want to give up.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of very smart, talented people in that space as well. So I like to keep that up. I also get there's a lot of travel element on that side of things as well, because a lot of my clients are global, multinational businesses, so I'll fly around the world to do those types of projects, which again is interesting, keeps things fun. So yeah, I do like to dip in and out of that for that reason as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I suppose it's always good to keep up the skill set because
Yeah, exactly.
you've always got that, as you said, as another income source. So you're not relying all on the property, because as you say, it's capital intensive.
Yeah.
So you've touched on it a little bit there, but sort of your current business model. So you described growing up, saving your own deposit and buying property. Is that changed now? So do you kind of finance it all yourself, or do you source properties for investors? How does that sort of work?
No, so we don't source property for anyone else. All the sourcing that I would do would be for our business. In terms of kind of financing it, so the business has been so far predominantly financed through internal funding. So that would be from personal savings, other source of personal income and retained profit. So like as I mentioned, I started saving for property when I was about 14, 15. And like from the day I've left school, the majority of me income from any jobs has just been continually invested. Yeah, I do have other source of income as well. So all the work from me, kind of consultancy work, generally goes back into the business as well. So I am very fortunate in that respect that I've been quite a high earner since relatively early in my career, which obviously when you're dealing with a capital intensive asset is beneficial, because it does reduce your reliance on external funding. I do mortgage some properties, but not all of them. Typically, how we'll kind of structure the finance on any deals is we'll purchase either the land or the house outright in cash and do all of the development in cash. And then we'll consider refinancing it on a mortgage product on the back end. But that depends on what other projects we've got going on, what the cost of capital is at the time, and where we're tracking with some of our financial metrics that we'll monitor internally. So for example, we'll have specific targets internally about how much gearing we have. So gearing is just a monitor of your debt levels within your business. So that's something we track quite stringently to make sure we're not over leveraged and overexposed. We like to keep any mortgage expenses as a total of overall expenses within like a certain threshold. So we're not paying too much out on mortgages every month. And that as well, from a customer perspective, that helps with control rent levels as well. Obviously, everyone who rents and everyone who has mortgages at the minute as well, be aware that prices of everything goes up. If we can keep our mortgage levels down, then it means we don't have to increase rents quite as steeply for tenants. And that is something that's important to us as well. So that's another reason why we monitor that quite stringently. In terms of kind of loans, as I mentioned, like we haven't taken on any external funding yet. In terms of private finance, which is quite, I think, unusual for property investors who build portfolios because they typically rely on private finance as a source of funding for deposits, again, because it's capital intensive. That isn't the route I went down when I initially started because I think I started saving so young, and then the industry that I work in is me kind of 9 to 5 is lucrative. So, and obviously I invest in a part of the country where property prices are relatively low, say somewhere like London. Um, so that's been helpful in not needing to raise a lot of external funding, although I am actually starting to think about using private finance as a source of funding and creating an offering for individuals to invest. Because I do get approached quite regularly by people who want to invest, and it's happening frequently enough now that I can't really ignore it, which is a very
Yeah.
flat And I'm very grateful to anyone who considers me and my business worthy of investing. So yeah, that's something I'm starting to think about. So watch this space because that might come to fruition in the
Yeah.
short to medium term.
And so just based on what you said, I had two questions. So the first one is how, in terms of how the business has progressed over the years, how have you known how quickly to scale, kind of how, um, the kind of the kind of level of work that you're doing,
Yeah,
like how, in terms of risk, like
yeah,
how
yeah,
have you found handling that? Because I assume there's probably been a jump somewhere where you've went from having one to then thinking, oh, am I ready to take on another? So
yeah, yeah.
what's the thought behind that being from your perspective?
So I have quite a cautious approach to risk. Like I'm not risk averse. I'm very much understand that to make any sort of return, you do need to take risk, but I'm very conscious of having controlled level of risk. So I approach it with caution and make sure I always protect the downside risk. So this is another advantage of also working in a consultancy on the consultancy side of things, because the type of work I do in that is all about, like, I basically do project management for very, very large finance projects where you're dealing with like millions and millions and millions of pounds. So I manage a lot of the risk on that as well. And that's kind of translated into my business also. So I will assess the risk levels and only scale up when I feel like, right, if the absolute worst could happen, have we got enough capital to be able to protect ourselves, like all of that type of thing. So it's very controlled growth, which I feel like is good and has served her well, because when the kind of economy turns as it has, we're not in a position where we're worried. Whereas like a lot of landlords who've maybe scaled very quickly and are very highly leveraged, um, are struggling and have maybe had to sell some of their assets because they can't afford the finance on it anymore. Whereas I'm not in that position because we've controlled our debt levels very well and scaled slowly with proper systems and processes in place. One of the things we're actually doing at the minute, so we've paused growth for a little bit while we do a full internal review of the business to make sure all the processes are robust, they're all documented properly. We've identified any like single points of failure and put mitigations in place for that sort of thing. So again, that sort of like mindset and approach I have to scaling the business, I've learned a lot of that through the consultancy work that I do. So again, that's another reason why it's advantageous for us to be doing kind of two things at once, or dipping in and out of the consultant world. So yeah, that's kind of how I've approached the scaling and knowing when to kind of go to the next level. I feel like I'm on the point of now, it's like, right, we're gonna try and go to the next level, and I'm just making sure the foundation's solid, ready
Yeah.
for that, which is kind of why we're doing a full internal review of absolutely everything at the minute.
Yeah. That actually touched on to my second question, which was about how you built up the knowledge about all
Yeah,
this, because you've talked about metrics, you've talked about how you're stringent on some of the things that you look at, but you've said yourself that it's that consultancy work that seems to have built your knowledge on some of these things, but also there's a lot of transferable skills there. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then just in terms of property itself, is I guess from maybe growing up around it, were you familiar with a lot of the sort of processes that you have to go through?
Yeah, so I'd say like on the operational side of things, so actually building a property or refurbishing something, I'd say I've got pretty average knowledge. Like I'd know how to do it. I know like the high level processes, but for anything technical, like that's not my bag. That's why I've got a team and other people who I can call upon for their technical knowledge. Like I know enough to be able to oversee it, and if something goes wrong, like I'll know how to kind of sort it out, but I'd have a project manager looking over the actual projects. I have a lot of trades who work on the projects that we do. Um, my role within Classhouse is more the investment, finance, process, business development side of things rather than the actual technical operational side because I'm not trained in construction. But I have access to people who are and who are far more skilled in that area than I would ever be. So I'll always call upon like their knowledge for stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that's maybe probably for people who might be starting out in this area, that's maybe one of the sort of pitfalls that they fall in terms of trying to do everything and not using the expertise or trying to do everything and be jack of all trades when maybe there's you can outsource some of that or have people in a team who can help more with that side of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. It's with any business, right? Like you can't do it all because there are going to be things that you excel at, which you should focus on, and things that you're just shocking at, that you should get
Yeah.
someone else in who is great at it. So yeah, exactly.
And one of my other questions is, so I know you've said purchasing land, building houses, but you've said a lot of the focus is on rental property. I just
Yeah.
want to know what, because so you see, I watch Homes Under the Hammer, say, right, and there's a lot of people who seem to be kind of buying something, refurbing it, then selling it. And from an outsider who doesn't really know much about property, I wonder what is sort of what is the reason that you went more on the rental side than kind of buying to sell on straight away?
Yeah. Funny thing you should mention Homes on the Hammer because I've actually been on that.
Oh, right.
I didn't actually buy anything when they were filming, but I was there at an auction and I was on the show for the whole of 2 seconds. But yeah, way back when I was still like at uni or something. But yeah, so I focused on rentals rather than buying and selling property, and I always have done that from the start. Because I wanted to build up an income stream which would give me the option of not having to work a 9 to 5 job. And I learned from quite young that having a rental portfolio would do that. Like it can replace the income you earn from a traditional job. Like I'm not saying I didn't ever want a traditional job. Like I still like that sort of work, but I just wanted options. Like if I didn't want to do a 9 to 5 for however long, then that would be okay, and I would still be able to afford me lifestyle. So that was the main reason for wanting a rental business. Buying, refurbing, and selling is a good strategy as well, because it allows you to make large chunks of cash in one go. But it doesn't allow you to build a stable, continuous revenue stream like a rental business does. And that the latter was kind of always my goal. If you're just starting out and you don't have a lot of cash and you do want to build a rental portfolio, then you can start by like flipping so that you can build your cash pot up. Like a lot of investors do that and start that way because you can learn how to refurbish things and then build your cash pot at the same time. And then once you've got a certain cash pot and you've done flips so many times and got a bit more experience, then you can start retaining some of the properties that you buy because you've got enough cash. So it just depends on what your starting point is and what your goal is. But when I started out, I was fortunate enough that I already had enough funding that I could go straight into the rental side of things. I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't ever do the flip model, because again, like that can be lucrative and you can be a bit more creative with it as well. But at the minute, very much focused on rental
Yeah.
portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. And um, thinking of your kind of journey so far, what have been some of the success and challenges that you've had with the business?
So my main successes would be achieving my goal of putting myself in a position where I'm job optional and to give myself time and freedom to kind of do what I want if I want to. That was my main goal from the start. So I'd say that's probably one of the ones that I'm most proud of. Other successes in terms of the property business. I've been featured in some industry magazines and interviewed on TV like for me property work. So I've been featured in YPN magazine and Property magazine, which are some kind of prominent publications in the property world. And I've been interviewed by BBC Breakfast and Vice UK as well, which I guess that's quite nice that they'd actually want to hear what I've got to say about property and the property world. Being able to do kind of builds from the ground up, and that was something that I'd always worked towards, and to be able to finance the full thing myself, that was what I'd class as a success and something I hope to keep doing going forward as well. I've got a great network of friends and both in and out the property space who are so supportive, which is good because I know like landlords in general get a lot of hate. So to have a lot of people kind of rooting for us and what I do is a success for me and something I'm very grateful for. Challenges in the industry. Property is a very challenging industry to work in. As I mentioned, you do get a lot of hate being a landlord. I mean, I've never experienced anyone target me directly, but as a cohort, landlords, private housing providers do get a lot of hate, which can be challenging at times. As we're just trying to run businesses and do the best we can and get on in life and provide people with nice houses. And there's some people just trying to tear your profession down and say you're a parasite and all the rest of it. So there's that side that can be challenging. Regulation changes quite a lot, something to keep on top of. That is very challenging. Increased labour and materials costs, meaning growth is more challenging, especially at the minute. That is always quite difficult. I feel like this challenge that I'm going to talk about is typical of anyone in any business as well, but I do find myself sometimes comparing myself to other property people in their businesses and feeling like, oh, I'm not doing enough. Like everyone knows I shouldn't do it, but everyone does it. So sometimes I do have to kind of check myself and be like, no, you're on your own journey. Like it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. Just keep kind of stay in your lane and keep doing what you're doing and ask for help where you need it and kind of be grateful for where you are now. Yeah, so that's always a challenge to just kind of rein yourself in and keep yourself on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting actually that you say that you still find that challenge, even though, as you said, you've had all these successes, you still find that, comparison element
Oh
of,
yeah.
yeah. And I mean, actually, what you're talking about the challenges, it kind of leads on nicely to my next question, which is, what are some of the common misconceptions you think about people have about landlords? Because as you said, it's quite clear in the, media and online that there's a lot of
Yeah.
hatred sometimes towards landlords, even
Yeah.
even
No.
though, from my perspective, I think, well, you know, rent, if you're not in the private rental market, if someone renting from, social housing, sometimes that's not always the best quality. So for
Yeah.
me, sometimes I think, if you've got a private landlord who's going to offer housing that's really high quality to a tenant compared to maybe a social housing, which, some of them might be really high quality and some of them may not be, surely the best is always for the tenant to be in the best property. But yeah, what are some of the misconceptions that you see about
Yeah.
landlords?
So firstly, I'd say I don't often use the word landlord. I mean, we'll use it interchangeably with housing provider, for example, for the purpose of this conversation. But landlord, I think it's quite an antiquated term, and I don't think it's reflective of what people or organisations who have property and rent it out do. We're not lords or ladies, lording or ladying over a piece of land. We're service providers, and the service that's being provided is housing. Just like a food provider, a supermarket provides a service, or hairdressers provide a service, or a business. And just to set the scene as well, before I'll talk about a few common misconceptions I think people have, is that a lot of the misconceptions that the general population will have about landlords generally stem from what they're seeing in the media. And we have to remember that the media exists to make money. It does not exist to educate and inform people. So that being said, good landlords don't make good headlines. Like, you're far more likely to read about a bad landlord than you are to read about a good one for that reason, because stories about bad landlords sell, they get more clicks and ad revenue and all the rest of it, than what stories about good landlords would. And I think a lot of people will have misconceptions about landlords because they've got gaps in their knowledge about how the housing market works in terms of the economic factors which dictate pricing and regulation which affects the rental market. Like, and that's not a criticism of like the general population, because like, why would anyone need to know the intricacies and economics of the housing market and how it actually works unless you're involved in it?
Mm.
I think some of the misconceptions stem from that as well. So what are the misconceptions then? Um, Firstly, one of the misconceptions I hear a lot, landlords don't do anything, being a landlord isn't a job. Another thing I hear quite a lot, is that landlords evict people for no reason. Landlords control rents is another one. Landlords shouldn't be allowed to exist is another one I hear quite a lot. So I'll just go into each of those in a bit more detail and kind of explain like my view on it as well. So firstly, landlords don't do anything. Being a landlord isn't a job. Being a landlord is definitely a job. If you're a housing provider, you're running a business, and there's a lot of work involved in that. So if I just kind of talk you through some of the typical things that would do to be able to kind of get a property available for someone. So you have to find the property, which involves looking for the property, going to viewings, analysing whether it's suitable or not. Then you've got to buy it. So that means engaging with solicitors, sorting out the finance for it, going back and forwards with estate agents. Then you've got to do the full refurbishment once you've bought it. So in a lot of cases, that means ripping the entire thing apart because it'll probably be knackered when you've bought it. Then you've got to manage all the trades and suppliers, coordinate refurbishment. Once that's done, you've got to market it, do all the credit and reference and checks for your tenants, arrange for all the relevant documentation, compliance, and etc. Then you've got to manage the tenancy throughout. So you're going to be responding to any maintenance requests, keeping up with ongoing compliance, gas safety checks, for example, doing rent reviews, and then there's all of the administrative work that comes around running any business, not just property. So that's stuff like accounting, renewing insurance, staying on top of any regulation specific to your industry, etc. And as well, especially with property, when people are saying, oh, being a housing provider, a landlord isn't a job. It's a very, very regulated sector, and so as a private landlord, I have to comply with about 170 different laws and 400
Wow.
regulation just before I can even let a property out. So just keeping up with and complying with all that regulation in itself is a job. Never mind like all of the other stuff that goes into being a housing provider. So, all of those activities are work and involve time and money. And some of those types of activities involve quite specialist skills as well. So if being a housing provider isn't a job, then neither is any other profession which
Mm.
provides a service to a market. So that is probably the main misconception that I hear quite a lot. Like, people do just think housing providers just sit there and do nothing, and I'd love to just sit there and do nothing and earn money, but not always the case. The second one I hear a lot is that landlords just evict people for no reason. As I've mentioned, if you're a housing provider, you're operating a business, and your tenants are paying customers, and anyone with any business sense doesn't evict paying customers for no reason. That just doesn't make sense. That's not to say that landlords don't evict tenants, they do, but there's always a reason why. So either a tenant stopped paying a rent, or they've engaged in antisocial behaviour and are in breach of their agreement, or the landlord wants to sell. There's always a reason why a tenant is asked to leave. Like, landlords don't just evict people like willy-nilly. I mean, I, as a housing provider, I've never evicted anyone. And obviously I know a lot of other housing providers who haven't either, or they've only evicted a very small proportion of their tenants, and it's always for a valid reason. So that will be number two. Number three misconception that I always hear is that landlords like control rent and they just put the rent up whenever they feel like it. Landlords as individuals only have so much control over what rent they charge, as rents are generally set by the market. Like, yeah, if you provided superior product, you could probably charge slightly more, but generally rents will be set by the market, and the main factors in that are, supply and demand is a key factor, interest rates, and to a lesser degree and a bit more indirectly, at least in England, like regulation does play into how rent levels are as well. So that's a misconception that I hear quite a lot, that, landlords just hike the rents up.
Yeah.
One, like in a free market, like it doesn't work like that. If you put the rent too high, no one's going to rent it from you. Like, the market supply and demand kind of balances it out. And the last one that I'll probably talk about is I hear quite a lot of, private landlords shouldn't exist. I've heard the argument many times that landlords should be allowed to exist because house is a human right and nobody should be allowed to profit from it. But if we're going with that argument, like food's also human rights, so are we also going to say that any establishment which provides food and profits from it should be allowed to exist either? Um, yeah, but I think it's as you mentioned as well, like there's different types of housing tenure in the market. So we have owner occupiers, the private rented sector, and the social housing sector as well. Like if the private rented sector didn't exist and we just said, right, no one can rent private anymore, it means anyone who's in that sector currently has to either buy a property or go into the social housing sector. And obviously that would be problematic because not everyone can buy the house for whatever reason. They can't get a mortgage, they don't have a deposit, whatever the reason is. And there isn't enough social housing to house everyone who needs a roof over their head. So where would people go if there wasn't a private housing sector as well? So yeah, there's some of the common misconceptions. I don't know, have you heard any other misconceptions that you'd like us to talk about, or anything
Um,
that you hear quite often?
I mean, I think the main one is the first one you described, which is about um landlords doing nothing, and I think it is a media one that gets
Yeah,
spun. I think it it helps get clicks, doesn't it? When people post their stories, and I think on Facebook and Instagram sometimes when people feel a bit disgruntled, they'll post
yeah,
about it. But I think it's because they put someone might have a bad experience with a landlord or you know a uh, a provider, and then they lump everyone within that
yeah,
bucket. And I
tarnish
think,
everyone with the
yeah,
same brush.
and I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's always going to be it's probably like a small minority who are acting kind of not in a sort of value driven way. But then obviously they tarnish the name for the rest of them. So I think that's the main one. I mean, I guess it's not really a misconception, but I think where maybe I guess Instagram or Facebook can be quite confusing is
Yeah,
about all the different sort of people who are um landlords or own property businesses. There's some people who post online who maybe it's quite confusing for someone who might be interested in starting, because there seems to be so many different sort of operating
yeah,
models for it. And I think my fear with some of it, you're very clear and transparent about what you're doing, but there's some people who maybe are I wouldn't say that they're scamming people, but they may be offering sort of courses or things that
yeah,
people are having to put a lot of money, like the upfront cost, to say, oh, pay £1,000 and come on this course and you'll be a
yeah,
property whiz. And I think that's some of the risk, isn't it? That the other side of it about people sort of vilifying landlord is you've got the people who really want to be is part of that sector, and they're going to pay a lot of money to try and get in there, but actually are they getting value out of those courses? And I think that's why I see a lot on Instagram. I don't know if you've seen that as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of that as well. And I'd always say to anyone, like, exercise caution before you ever sign up to anyone's training course. Do a lot of research into who they are, what they've achieved, how much experience they have. Speak to other people who've done their courses to get some kind of honest feedback, because although the property industry, in terms of buying something, renting it out, that is highly regulated. The property education sector is a different ball game, and that is not regulated. Well, is it, to my knowledge, it isn't
Yeah.
very regulated. Obviously, I don't operate in the property education space, but to my knowledge, it isn't highly regulated, and that is potentially a problem. So for anyone who's kind of looking to get started in property investment, yeah, there are some really good courses out there, but do your research first and speak to other people who've done the course, and try and speak to some of the people who've done the course before committing to anything like that. I mean, I haven't got any formal property training in that sense. Like, I've attended a few kind of like seminars here and there, but I've never paid for like a training course by anyone. Like, I'm not saying it's not a good idea. Like, you can fast track your progress if you do that. But again, I've been quite lucky in the sense that I've had access to a lot of the kind of technical knowledge through family connections. But I appreciate someone who doesn't have that would potentially want to do a course like that. So, but yeah, definitely exercise caution when going down that route.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing with the sort of risks of the internet is that there's a lot of people on there who can blow their own trumpet and say that they've got stats about what their experience are,
Yeah.
but actually, how can you validate that? How can you verify it? And I think, my thoughts on it is, if the first thing someone's going to ask you is about, come on this course and it only costs this much, or there's a big discount that they're offering you
Yeah.
if you pay it a day. I think that's normally where the alarm bells go in my head. And I'm like, oh, I mean, I think maybe coming from the Northeast makes us maybe a bit cynical about that sort of too good to be true sort of thing,
Yeah.
anyways. Um, and yeah, just talking about sort of Instagram and things. So I did notice that you do have your own kind of personal finance
Yeah.
education sort of account as well. So that's Classhouse Money. And I thought maybe we could just touch a bit on that. And I think one of the things, knowing you from when you were in school, that I'm interested in is probably just about where your drive comes from. So you haven't mentioned this in the chat so far, but you were in school, you were the sort of person who was like top of the class, like always very driven, like always very motivated. And yeah, I just wonder if, you know, where that comes from, what sort of inspired you going through things.
Is that your polite way of saying I was the biggest nerd at school? No, that's fine. I own that. I was very much a nerd at school, but that's all good. Yeah, I was very motivated and driven at school. I loved school and I loved learning, so like really enjoy being there. I guess is kind of half the battle sometimes. Like, if you like something, you're gonna try hard and try and be really good at it, right? So yeah, that was number one. Like, I really loved it. Um, yeah, I think my drive and motivation was fueled by a combination of wanting to do really well and achieve, and obviously enjoying the whole learning process as well. But on reflection, I think it was actually driven by a lot of anxiety and fear of failure, if what would happen if I didn't
Mm,
like do well at stuff at school. I'm actually a really anxious person, and I didn't realize I was an anxious person until probably like my mid-20s, when it became like more talked about and I understood properly what anxiety was. Um, like my earliest memory of being anxious about something was probably when I was about 7 years old. I can remember it very well. I was in Miss Bowman's maths class in primary school, and we're learning how half numbers, I think. And we done a test, and I think I got like 3 out of 20 or something on it. And I can remember feeling like such shame because I'd gotten
mm.
the low score, and like I pretended to my mum that I was ill the next day so I wouldn't have to go in. And that's like such a tiny like moment in life, but I remember it so clearly and how it made us felt. And I feel like that's kind of quite a pivotal moment of how I kind of was through the rest of school, like terrified of like failing and not being good at something and wanting to excel to kind of avoid that feeling. I mean, I don't see like failure like that at all now. Obviously, you grow, you learn, you
Yeah.
frame your own failure and success benchmarks, don't you? But I think honestly, like as well as like loving to learn, I think a lot of me drive and motivation came from not wanting to fail at anything, rather than wanting to be like amazing at it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really interesting actually you say that because I mean, I I feel the same way in some sense. And I think a lot of the people that I talk to who were kind of similar to us in terms of being in kind of top set for things and um fast as high achievers, is that it seems to be that, you sort of have a realization when you're a bit older that actually like I don't know what came first, whether you're anxious because you were like that or whether you were like that because you were sort of anxious about what the repercussions would be if you
Yeah, I
weren't.
know. I mean, I don't know what I thought would happen if I didn't get an A star on that test or whatever, but surely like the world wasn't going to come crashing down. But
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, like it was like a proper real thing, and I was like terrified if I didn't like do the best that I could do.
Yeah, because I have a few nieces and nephews now, and it's funny because look, like they were only in primary school, but they were doing homework and them getting bothered about tests. I'm like, I want to instill in them like for me, I think that's probably the bit about education that I'm not like looking back on it, I'm not really a fan of because I think sometimes it instills in you this sense of doing things just to pass a test or get high in a test
Yeah,
rather than truly understanding things or really kind of being prepared for real life where, you can't get 100%. Like I think in school, because kids are so talented and they try really hard. They always have to push up the benchmarks and the way like I guess probably now people doing A levels probably to get the top score you have to pretty much get 100%,
yeah,
so there's not really that much wiggle room for things not going right. Whereas I think what I want to instill in my nieces and nephews is that thing of actually, to focus less on the result and more on the journey a bit and like picking yourself back up
yeah.
when things aren't going right. Because otherwise, you probably come out of school and be very anxious when things do go wrong. Because
Yeah.
everyone faces failure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. I think, like, not that I've been close to the kind of mainstream education system for a long time, but from what I do know, I don't really think it prepares you very well for like real life. Like, I know a lot of the stuff that I've learned around business and real life, like I didn't learn it in school. Like, I was either learning it from parents or in like higher education, which not everyone has access to, not everyone wants to access, or through kind of self-education. Like I definitely don't think mainstream education is prepares you for real life. Definitely not.
Yeah, yeah. And so you've touched already a bit about your money mindset, and I think what I think people listening to this will be really interested in, because people who comment on my YouTube videos, a lot of the people have the same kind of desire of wanting time freedom or like job optionality. So, that idea of um building up enough savings or building up a business where, you're not required to be at a 9 to 5, because I think a lot of what motivates me some personally, and I know motivates other people, is that not wanting to feel trapped by your sort of circumstances, so don't want to, if you're in a job that you don't enjoy, if you're someone who's got a lot of debt or, maybe it's not a well-paying job, you're probably thinking to yourself, I'm doing this until I retire and there's no sort of way out. But I just wonder kind of your money mindset, like, have you always kind of been of the mind that you want to be job optional, or is that something that you just developed when you were at university?
No, I mean, as far as I can remember, I've always wanted to be like in control of my own life. I am a bit of a control freak mind. I do like to have everything in order. So maybe that stems from it. But I mean, I've always had quite an abundant mindset when it comes to money, and I've always had a good relationship with it. Like I don't think money will ever be a limiting factor for us because I have this mindset. And if I come up against something and I'm like, oh, I would never think, oh, I can't afford that. I'll always ask, well, what do I have to do to be able to afford that? Like I don't have a limited mindset when it comes to that sort of thing. And I think it's probably stems from how I was brought up by like my parents, or where I kind of learned about money and the habits and behaviors around it. I was given like an excellent foundation in personal finance, like from my parents who really did like lead by example. So um they always worked. We were never like relying on benefits or anything. My dad ran his own business. My mum was a midwife in the NHS. Like they never had any debt. We didn't live like a flashy lifestyle. I was brought up not to value material things and to be like self-reliant. And like my dad kind of instilled some really important lessons in us from quite early. So it would be things like, oh, you'll always earn more money working for yourself than you ever will for anyone else. Like, never rely on the state to provide for you financially. The most tax efficient way to live your life through business. Don't ever let anyone tell you you can't achieve anything, like, not even me. I think he's probably lived to regret that one, because every time we buy like a house or go on a new project now, he's like, oh God, here we go again. But yeah, and like they did some like really cool things to teach us about money, and that on reflection I only realized like that they're really cool, and like did set me up for like life and how I manage money and stuff now. So it's just things like when they started to give us pocket money, like I would be giving it monthly so that I would learn to budget and not just spend it all in one go. Like for Christmas, like when I was really little, like when you'd write out like your Christmas list and post it off to Santa or whatever. My mum would always make sure that we didn't get everything on the list, to kind of teach you that, you can't have everything in life. Everything doesn't always go your way. Like you can't have everything you want all
Yeah.
the time. And I don't think I ever heard me mum and dad say, oh, we can't afford that. So I never learned to like limit myself to not being able to afford things. And like we always live very frugally, and um I was always taught like if you want something, like you save up for it, like you don't get into debt for it. Like you can have
Yeah.
what you want, but you just need to work hard for it, and those sorts of things. I mean, that even stems to like both sets of my grandparents were like that as well, like lived very frugally, like didn't come from much, but made like a really good life for themselves. Like I can remember one time when I was younger being told off by my granddad because I'd ran the internet bill up by like £3 when it was, remember when it was dial-up,
Yeah.
like that. So I think my money mindset and my kind of attitudes and behaviors and habits when it comes to money were very much like foundationally like from family. Um,
Yeah.
and the more kind of technical knowledge I've like learned as I got older and kind of self-taught, and then obviously I've got a like my degree covered elements of finance, and then I went on to do like management accounting qualification. So the technical knowledge came from that way. The more foundational personal finance stuff came from kind of my upbringing. And I recognize that is like such a privilege because not everyone has that from a young age. So, like I recognize that I have a significant advantage from that. And, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. And I think it is, as you say, it's that having those role models. So, I'm similar
Yeah.
position, see my parents work, manage money, not really do that delayed gratification of like, what we're saving up for something, or it's not that have something instantly and like pay for it later, and
Mhm.
I think as well, when I was younger, I was similar to you, you saw money physically changing hands rather than it all being on card as well. So yeah, I think there's something about that like, when my mum used to go out shopping, the only money she had was what was in her purse. So it was like, well,
Mhm.
if I've got no more money, then we can't get it today, I'll have to go home to get more money, and come back another day. So whereas now I think kids maybe growing up, you maybe have to take a different sort of strategy to teach them about money because they aren't necessarily going to see
Yeah.
money changing hands.
Mhm. No, exactly. Agree.
Um, and yeah, so you mentioned kind of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Is there any other personal finance books that you'd recommend people read?
Yeah, so there's a few books about like money investing. So obviously Rich Dad Poor Dad's a really good starter for property investors. It's kind of like the Bible of property investing, teaches you about kind of assets and cash flow, that sort of thing. It's a book called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, and that's about like financial habits and behaviors and creating a good personal finance system, which is really good. There's a book by Rob Dix, which I really enjoyed reading, called The Price of Money. That is a bit more technical and economics based. It explains the like monetary system and what inflation is and how this affects your personal finance. So that's a bit more technical, but a good read if you're a bit of a like economics nerd like me. Um, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, another one about habits and behaviors. And the premise of that is doing well and being successful with money is less about what you know and it's more about how you behave with it.
Mm,
So that's very interesting. And then a final one on kind of money investing, How to Own the World by Andrew Craig. So that's about like key investment principles and how to diversify your investment portfolio. And then I've got a couple of recommendations that aren't specifically money investing, but I would recommend everyone read them because they're more like health based, but what is wealth if you don't have your health? So
yeah.
yeah, so Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker is
Mm,
about the science of sleep and how important it is. It's probably the most profound book that I've ever read. And I've made like a lot of changes to my routines based on what I've learned in that. And then very final one, How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Gerber. So that's like a nutritional science book and it's about what to eat to prevent developing like certain diseases because again, like what's the point in having wealth if you don't have your health to enjoy it and live like a long, long life? So yeah,
oh,
those are
wow.
some book recommendations. I do
Yeah.
recommend also the Goodreads app is really good. I don't know if you use it already, but it's good for like searching for books and tracking your reading and getting recommendations on specific topics and stuff. So yeah, I recommend that too.
Yeah, I do like the Goodreads app. I mean, I'll do it where like I'll go in a bookshop and then I'll be like just like on my want to read
Yeah,
bookshelf.
yeah,
So
yeah, I do
yeah,
that
I look
too.
them up. Yeah. Um, yeah, no, they're great recommendations. I haven't heard of all of them, and I'd heard of the sleep one, but I haven't actually read it. But after that recommendation, I might
Yeah,
might
oh,
check
it's
it out.
brilliant. It is quite sciencey, but I think you'll probably like it.
Great. And then the final question is just, um, do you have any business or personal finance goals in the next 5 years that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm planning on continuing to grow the business over the next 5 years. So there'll be more land and property purchases, I'm hoping, so that I can provide more people with housing in the local area. We actually do all of our kind of strategy and budget and target setting in April because it's the beginning of our financial year. So we're actually in the middle of reviewing this at the minute. So it's quite timely. I think one of my key business goals over the next 5 years is I'm slowly but surely like systemizing myself out of the business so that it runs without me. It's not completely yet there yet. Like there are some areas of the business where I've completely like removed myself, and like my team manages it or it's run by technology or whatever. But there are some parts of it where my input on a day-to-day is still needed. So I'm trying to like remove that dependency so that kind of frees up more of my time to do other things. So that I'd say that's kind of like my key priority for the next few years at least. Personal finance goals for the next 5 years. I will probably move house again within the next 5 years or so. something that's I'll be working towards. And I've started to think about which area I'd maybe want to live in next, what type of property I want to live in and stuff. But I mean, I've just refurbished the house I live in now, so I want to enjoy it before
Yeah.
moving on. Other personal finance goals. I like to travel a lot. So this January, I actually spent most of it out of the country in the Caribbean. I have seasonal affective disorder, so I really struggle in the winter to like function properly. So I trialed this year like being out of the country in like a hotter, sunnier climate in like the worst part of the winter, and it really helped. So I'm planning on doing that every January going forward. So obviously that costs money. So I need to factor that in
Yeah.
into the personal finances. Yeah, and over the next 5 years, I'll continue to save and invest as I do now. Like my investment strategy is very boring, but your finance strategy should be boring and just like leave it
Yeah.
alone, tick away. So I'll be just continuing chipping away at that, I guess.
Yeah. Brilliant. And then, yeah, I know it sounds really fascinating that you've been able to spend a whole month in the Caribbean. I mean, I guess that's the benefit of not being tied to a 9 to 5, where you're in control of when you take your holidays or being able to work abroad or what have you. So, it's really interesting. Um, but yeah, no, thanks for sitting down and chatting to us. I think I found it really fascinating to hear more about your business and about your mindset. And I'll drop all the kind of links to you in the description box of this video. And yeah, just thanks again for taking the time to speak to us.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Anytime. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.